If we are talking in exactly 12 months' time about this, I will be saying we're all going to war. My name is Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, 25 years in the British military, ostensibly a tank commander, having commanded tanks from every level up to regimental level. I'm also a chemical, biological and nuclear counter-terrorism specialist. Putin said last Christmas he wanted to put the lights out, turn the heating off in Ukraine, and a lot of energy was expanded on that. He didn't quite achieve that. During this time as well, the Ukrainians were doing a lot of preparation, a lot of training. We had thousands of Ukrainian soldiers just behind me here on Salisbury Plain, being trained by the Brits and the Australians and others. So everything was building if the Ukrainians could hang on in the winter. In the spring, the Russians blew up the Kharkiv Dam, which flooded vast areas of the Dnipro sort of floodplain. They turned the Dnipro River from a sort of 500-meter wide river into several miles, making it all the more difficult for the Ukrainian forces to head south. At the same time, we also had the much vaunted Wagner group, led by Prigozhin. By early summer, Prigozhin, who was a very eccentric character, very difficult to judge, decided to march on Moscow. He got into Russia and started to move, shot down a number of Russian aircraft, killed a number of Russian troops, but eventually was ground to a halt and stopped, and things turned around. Had Prigozhin got to Moscow in June this year, things might be very, very different. In the summer, we had the much vaunted spring offensive started. This is an incredible feat. The front line between the Ukrainian forces and the Russian forces, about 1,000 miles. And what the Russians had built, they built a defensive line called the Hawken line, very, very similar to the trenches of the First World War. What Ukraine found it incredibly difficult was to punch through this huge defensive line, not only minefields, but what we call dragon's teeth, big concrete boulders that prevent tanks moving, all covered by massive artillery and attack helicopters. Going slightly better during the summer of this year was the maritime offensive. And they produced these maritime attack drones that can travel hundreds of miles. And they released these into the Black Sea Fleet, the Russia's, Mark capability based in Sebastopol that really ruled the Black Sea, was really caught napping. However, more recently, as the winter has come again, things have started to become sort of static, and world events like the war in Gaza is starting to impact on things. So although a lot of people are saying a stalemate, it's not quite a stalemate, but operating in the winter and the snow is challenging. But I think there are a few things, positives for the Ukrainians. We learned that the Russians have lost 350,000 dead in the war so far. If you think the British Army currently is 70,000, that would be over 4 British armies destroyed in 18 months. So we are in a position, hopefully, when the spring comes, when all the training of these combined arms will have been completed, when the Ukrainians have a mobile marine force that could attack the enemy from the rear. But the geopolitics is going to have a huge play on this. Doesn't matter how determined the soldiers are on the ground. If the American billions do not come and the ammunition that it buys, next year, then Ukraine will run out of ammunition. One of the huge concerns is the biggest nuclear power station in Europe, Zaporizhzhia, and that is right in the line of contact. Zaporizhzhia has 6 reactors. It is 3 times the size of Chernobyl, which everybody will remember when that blew up in the 80s and spread contamination all over Europe and to the UK. If they use Zaporizhzhia as a sort of improvised nuclear weapon, which it looks like they might do, that could have a huge impact. The only thing stopping the Russians doing it at the moment is where that contamination is going. and it very much depends on the weather. Without wanting to oversimplify things, if there is a high pressure system, that contamination is coming west to Europe. There's a low pressure, it's going east into Russia. And very significantly now, Russia is on a war footing. What we call, they are preparing for total war. Their whole economy, 30% of it, is now being spent on defense. They are turning out 100 new tanks a month. Britain is planning to turn out 100 tanks over the next 3 to 5 years, and everything is focused on it. If Putin prevails in Ukraine, he's not stopping there. I know people in Latvia and Lithuania are absolutely terrified that he's going to go there, which would make complete sense. Similarly with Poland, similarly with Finland. And because the Russians are on a war footing and churning out so much kit, that is a possibility. So from a geopolitical level, this is what I think our politicians in Westminster and politicians in Washington and the other key European and NATO capitals should be focusing on, because World War III is not that far away. The rule of law is the rule of the gun, and Putin has the biggest gun. And we mustn't forget, he has been in power for over 25 years now. He has almost ultimate power. So he's in a pretty strong position. The Prigozhin thing, I expect, was a bit of a wake-up call. At the moment, whatever he does, he's secure. He has put 350,000 young Russians to their death in the Crimea and in the Donbass over the last 18, 20 months, and he's still in power. No other leader in the world could do that. A lot of people hoped that the Great Spring Offensive would have been successful this year and the Russians would have been sent packing back to Russia. That hasn't happened. We're approaching the second year, we're approaching the third year of this war, and the losses, the deprivation, everything else Ukraine have had to suffer. Undoubtedly, it's been challenging for him. He is still in a strong position, doing a remarkable job under the most trying and difficult circumstances and conditions. 2024 is going to be a decisive year now. And I'm pretty confident saying that, because if Ukraine doesn't prevail next year, they're not going to prevail. And I think this is very salutary, and this is what people in the West and the world need to really understand. So next year can go in a number of directions. It could bang on exactly the same as it is, in a sort of stalemate with little movements here and there, very much back to the Western Front, the First World War, probably 1916, 1917, small successes, movements back and forward, and it could ramp on. That's what Russia wants. So that is one option. The next option, and if we are talking in exactly 12 months' time about this, I will be saying we're all going to war, because if that happens, then that is a prospect. The best prospect is that all the money and the ammunition is agreed early next year. That flows into Ukraine. The Ukrainian armored forces managed to break through the Hawken line, get into Crimea, and the Russians are forced into a withdrawal. But the sort of third way is that that nothing happens. There is no movement. We're talking this time next year, potential of somebody like Trump taking over in the States, the potential that we have a British different government here, and the potential that Russia steps up and moves forward, perhaps also attacks into Latvia, Lithuania, and Finland. Of course, the moment there is an attack on one of those states, it then triggers what we call Article 5. Article 5 is the NATO article that states if one element of NATO is attacked, everybody is attacked, and therefore everybody piles in. So if that happens, then NATO, and Britain is a key member of it, we will be involved in order to defeat the Russians. Now, I hope that that is absolutely the least likely option. And I sort of think it is, but in order to make it the least likely option, our politicians in this country, around Europe, NATO headquarters, and most importantly in Washington, need to understand that and give the Ukraine the wherewithal to make sure it doesn't happen.